Hello and welcome to The Best Ever, a unique wrestling analysis podcast from ProWrestlingMusings.com, looking at some of the best ever wrestling matches through the eyes of some of the best ever fans. I'm Craig from Pro Wrestling Musings, and today I'm delighted to be joined by the Podfather, the man that is more podcast than man, the man of 1004 podcasts. It is Mags, of course. Mags, how are you today?
Wow, what an introduction. I mean, to be called one of the best ever, I mean, that's definitely a misnomer. But yeah, when you approached me with this offer of being a part of this, yeah, I couldn't wait to jump in it. I thought it's a really cool, unique idea, one that you don't really get a lot of now in wrestling podcasts. So yeah, can't wait to get into it.
Are you saying that there are too many wrestling podcasts?
Absolutely not. Not for me. What I'm saying is there's not enough unique, good ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. So for people that might not be familiar with you, Mags, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely, fine. If you haven't heard of me, what are you doing? Why are you listening to a wrestling podcast?
Yeah.
Welcome to the world of podcasts. I am Mags, and I am, as Craig said, I am on way too many podcasts for any human to be on. I started with a little project called Why We Watch, and then that expanded into another project called Badlands, which were both primarily wrestling-based podcasts. They've unfortunately gone by the wayside now, and I've kind of like spread my wings a little bit into MMA and now European football or soccer for our American
football
listeners.
It's called football.
Obviously, it's football, but you've got to play to the audience. So yeah, that's the kind of the content that I do now for a group that we've got called Radio Tekkers. So yeah, you can pretty much hear me everywhere. If there's a podcast ever been available, or even if it's in somebody's mind that it's going to be available, I've probably been on that podcast.
And why podcasts? What kind of draws you into podcasting so much?
Yeah, it was a kind of weird transition into podcasting for me, because I've always kind of like listened to podcasts for the last few years, but never had that kind of ambition to create myself. It was never something that I really saw myself doing. And then I got invited on a friend's podcast, and then another one kind of like buses where they all come at once. And I kind of caught the bug. So I contacted a few people who I've known through wrestling Twitter about their advice and kind of like shot some ideas at them. So asked about kind of equipment and how to get going. Yeah, and it kind of snowballed from there. I reached out to a friend of mine who had a podcasting network. Tossed him this idea, and they were receptive straight away. Said, "Yep, bring it on," and that's how Why We Watch started. And yeah, the ball kind of started rolling from there. Got a little bit of a fan base going. People seem to have really took that podcast to their hearts, and that kind of emboldened me, I suppose, to be more creative and come up with some different ideas. And yeah, it's for some weird reason, known only to the people themselves, is I ended up being quite in demand, and people wanted me on their podcast, wanted to be on my podcast, and it kind of grew from there to the point now where me and a group of friends are looking to maybe kind of like really do some good work in the world of podcasting and video creation. So yeah, for me, it's always been about having fun. When I stop having fun, I'll stop doing podcasting.
It's a good rule for many other things. Yeah. Last question before we jump into the kind of the bulk of it. This is a really interesting question, one that I spent a lot of time thinking up. It's one of those kind of unique things that only I can come up with. So Mags, why wrestling? Why do you watch wrestling?
Wow, that is a throwback, sir. That is a throwback.
I came up with that question all by myself.
I know, it's unique. That is unique. Yeah, wrestling was something that I enjoyed with my gran. She was a huge WWF fan back in the day. and she was the only one in the family who had Sky at the time. So when I used to stay at my grand's at the weekends, we would watch Superstars, we would watch Wrestling Challenge, All American Wrestling, all kind of in like blocks on Sky One. I was hooked from a very early age, from about 3-4 year old. She absolutely adored Macho Man and Ultimate Warrior, so I ended up adoring them as well. And it kind of stuck with me. It was a real way that me and my gran bonded. And after she passed away, it kind of stuck with me. I had a period for about maybe 10 years where I kind of fell out of love, I suppose, with wrestling, where I wasn't watching it, but I still kind of like kept my ear to the ground in terms of like dirt sheets and news to keep up with what was going on in the storylines. But yeah, then I was dragged back in, kicking and screaming about 5 years ago, with New Japan. I was part of a little group on a group DM on Twitter. And they were talking about New Japan and Kenny Omega and Kazuchika Okada, and that dragged me back in, and it just I haven't left since, unfortunately. They can't get rid of me now.
Who would want to? Okay, wonderful answer. Thank you. So I'm going to do a bit of a lead up to this match, then we'll talk through the match, what happened, and kind of look through these slides that I have. Listeners, when you hear about the slides, it'll be available in the show notes if you're not watching the YouTube version. So, Mags, I'll go through the lead up to this. You can let me know if I've missed something out or whatever. This is mainly just from the video package of the match. So, it all seems to center around a promo that Hulk Hogan is doing where he's blaming the fans for driving him out of the WWF, whilst also taking credit for the WWF's success. The Rock comes out and rebuffs Hulk Hogan, saying that he believed in Hulk Hogan and eventually challenges him to a match. Hogan accepts, but he disses The Rock, so eventually The Rock hits him with a rock bottom. Then there's a lot of to and fro between the two over the next few weeks, with such things as the NWO beating up The Rock so much that he's going in an ambulance. They then hit the ambulance with a truck in kind of true Vince McMahon WWE wrestling fashion. And eventually there's a incident where Hogan actually hits The Rock with a hammer after a tag team match, I believe. That's my understanding of the lead up to this match. Mags, is there anything else that is worth mentioning that I've missed out?
Yeah, I mean, this was absolutely my wheelhouse. This was kind of like the tail end of when I was at my heart of wrestling fandom. So yeah, I was all invested in this. The part where the NWO actually was brought into the WWE was pretty interesting. There's an episode of Raw where we keep getting vignettes of Vince McMahon giving these like soliloquies and talking away to the camera. Talking about how he's going to destroy his own creation, how his own creation has turned on him, and there's only going to be him who takes it down. And then we get this really well done shot of him turning his chair around, and you actually discover he was actually talking into a mirror. And on the back of his chair, he's got the NWO wrote on it, and he's saying he's going to bring in this lethal injection of poison from the NWO. A few weeks after that, the NWO actually do arrive in the WWE, and they said, "We're not here to kill the WWE. We just want to come and earn a living." And then you see vignettes with them trying to give gifts to Austin. I think they give him a 6-pack of beer, and he just throws it away. But the bit that actually starts this feud and this match was when the 3 NWO members see The Rock backstage, and Hogan asks for a picture. He says, my kid would really like me to have a picture with you. So The Rock takes a picture with him, and then everything seems hunky-dory, everything seems nice, and then Hogan says, no accounting for taste. So the NWO look to walk away. Rock stops him, and he says, "Look, I was being nice, giving you a picture for your son, just being friendly." And then you have to say that, and then he goes to essentially mocks all of the NWO in a brilliant little segment. He does the Chico dance for Razor Ramon. He does the Big Daddy Cool Diesel that, and then he rips into Hogan, then storms off, and that essentially leads into this feud with Hogan really wanting to lay the smackdown on The Rock, I suppose.
Brilliant summary. So it's a match that you've kind of always heard about. I don't think I'd ever actually watched it all the way through. I'm actually not brilliant at going back and watching old things. I kind of need the context and the storylines, but I really did enjoy watching this match. And half of the thrill of watching this match is just the crowd, like monitoring how the crowd are reacting. Like when Hulk Hogan comes out, it's mostly positive. Immediately, you get that kind of Wrestlemania stare down at the beginning as they're all taking it in. But very, very early on in the match, there's cheers for Hogan when he's downing The Rock. Every time he puts The Rock down, it's immediate cheers for Hogan. And eventually The Rock manages to turn the tables, downing Hogan. And it's a very John Cena-ish response. You can hear cheers in amongst it, but it's mostly boos. The boos have that quite deep-voiced kind of tone, whereas the cheers are kind of more high-pitched. And the story of John Cena always was that all the male wrestling fans were booing him, and it was female wrestling fans and children that were cheering him. And that's what this sound really seemed to remind me of. There were some dodgy bits from Hogan, but this isn't a state-of-the-art wrestling match. And we're going to go straight to the match stats to kind of examine that a bit. Mags, the first thing that jumps out to me about these statistics is the way that Hulk Hogan is kind of working in this match. There's a lot of strikes, a lot of strike downs where he's kind of flooring The Rock quite often with his heavy hands, to use some kind of wrestling language. Not that many grapples, a little bit of submission. What does that tell you about how Hulk Hogan performed and how he managed to be part of a really great match despite his perhaps physical limitations?
Yeah, that to me tells me that The Rock is there to sell. The Rock is there to put in the work. Hogan can kind of be the ring general, obviously with his experience, but The Rock is there to take the bumps. Because obviously this no offense to Hogan, at this time he wasn't in the best of conditions. His knees were absolutely shot. So to get a 16-minute match out of him, it had to be very, very choreographed. You had to know exactly what you're doing, exactly when to do it, and he couldn't have had a better opponent at that than The Rock, because The Rock at that time was arguably one of the best sellers in the world, potentially to the point of overselling sometimes. And you mentioned about it not being a stellar match, and you mentioned about the crowd, and that's actually one of the reasons why I picked this match.
Okay.
Because when you put this idea forward and you were saying it's the best ever, matches that went through my head were like maybe Flair versus Steamboat, like really kind of 5-star matches, Omega versus Okada 4. But I actually wanted to try and throw you for a loop and give you a match that if you watch it in the cold light of day, this is as basic a wrestling match as you are going to get. It's stomps, it's like I said, it's lots of strike downs, it's punches, it's big boots. There's no kind of like technical skill as you would get nowadays. But the thing that puts this over the top for me is something you mentioned like really early on. It's the crowd. The crowd are so hyper for this. I honestly think WWE missed the boat by not having this as the main event, because that crowd was electric, and then whatever followed it kind of died a little bit of a death, and it's because you've got the biggest wrestler in the history of the business against the hottest commodity at the time. And yeah, it's just if you watch it with no sound, this is going to be a bog standard 2 to 3 star match. You put that sound back on and it elevates it to 4.5. In some people's eyes, maybe a 5-star match. So yeah, I really wanted to try and test the limits of how much statistics can incorporate those like intangibles of fan reaction.
Yeah, and it certainly can't. What the statistics does do with this match, though, is it captures the other really interesting part of it. So the really, really famous part of this match is The Rock was a babyface and Hogan was heel, but the crowd weren't really playing ball, so they had to change up halfway through the match. So that's, yeah, exactly. So when we look at the fouls, it's 12 to 14. That's a lot of fouls for coming from like 2 guys. You know, you would expect maybe Hogan would have 14 and The Rock might have 2 or 3 based on the babyface heel dynamic. But what we can actually do with the statistics is pinpoint exactly where The Rock kind of flips that switch. And it comes around the 9-minute mark. If you go, actually we'll come on to that later because it doesn't actually show that much. The 9-minute mark, so The Rock doesn't use any fouls until after that 9-minute mark. Hulk Hogan, 10 of his 14 fouls are pre the 9-minute mark. And then 4 of them come after. So, although he doesn't go completely white meat babyface, and he actually uses his belt after that, before that he's doing lots of eye gouges and stuff, but he sort of cleans it up a bit and starts playing to the crowd. You know, he even does the classic Hulk Hogan spot, the kind of the fire up, the Hulk up. So, The Rock starts outside, They go to the outside, the Hulk Hogan starts taking stuff off the table, The Rock reverses it and then just starts like smashing his head off the table, uses the ring post, and then that's it. He's kind of playing that kind of role for the rest of the match. So that's really interesting. I don't know what that means for you, Mags, as somebody who perhaps lived this match more than I did.
Yeah, for me, it is 2 wrestlers who know how to react to a crowd. As good as a lot of wrestlers are nowadays, technically this is probably the best generation of wrestlers that we've ever had. But the issue is a lot of wrestlers nowadays want to get their moves in and don't necessarily react to what the audience wants. This here is 2 wrestlers who knew that the audience was turning and went with it and changed up the match, changed up the game plan to get the best out of that audience. And I think it works brilliantly. The way The Rock, I mean, in the position that The Rock was in, he could have easily stood his ground and said, "Nope, I'm the babyface. I'm the big star in this company. I'm coming out of this looking like $1 million." But he was more than willing to let Hogan, who was just back in the company after almost a decade out, he was more than willing to let that crowd take Hogan back in their arms and really kind of like relive the Hulkamania of old. And the Rock was such a star for allowing that. I thought that for me, I remember at the time cheering for The Rock and then afterwards cheering for Hogan. So I'm as fickle as any fan. But yeah, I think that this just shows 2 wrestlers who know what their audience wants and how to give it them.
And it's very giving as well from The Rock's perspective to completely go with it and not hold his ground and force things through. Okay, so if we move on to the next part, which is the flow of offense, this is minute by minute, and the way this works is we total up the amount of offense in each minute so that you can see how kind of on top or in control each wrestler is minute by minute of the match. And what's really interesting about this is you can see where they peak and where it falls. So you can see it starts quite slow. There's a little bit of back and forth, mostly from Hogan. Then kind of coming up to the midway point, there's a couple of big kind of flow of offense changes, some big peaks for Hogan, some big peaks for The Rock. Then we get to a kind of a bit of a struggle in the middle. This is when kind of the rules are being bent. There's a lot of belt stuff, table stuff on the outside, ring post is used. And then we get two huge surges at the end. And I really wanted to ask you about this, Mags. Just around the 14-15 minute mark, after The Rock has hit a rock bottom and Hogan kicks out, The Rock goes to continue offense and Hulk Hogan does the classic Hulk up spot. I was wondering, obviously Hulk Hogan has been heel for years. How significant was that to see him going back to his old babyface roots almost?
It takes you back to your childhood. It really does. You pop like you have never popped before, and you go on that journey with the crowd. It was absolutely amazing. And what really interests me about this whole kind of this flow of offense is The Rock is never takes the lead until the very last minute. And we get that really kind of slow start. And how they both kind of like build to a crescendo on it, and it's only that last few seconds where The Rock is able to better his opponent and get the win. That's a really interesting statistic. I mean, watching the match from my point of view, I would have thought there were quite a few points where The Rock was getting way more offense in. But obviously, looking at the stats,
there is. So there's two flow of offense graphs that you've got there. So there's the minute by minute one, which is very zigzaggy, and then you've got the cumulative, which I think you're talking about now, which goes up and up and up.
Yeah.
So that's the one where I kind of add it on each time, so you can kind of see how much is being hit. It's kind of like to show how much each guy is having to take as it goes on. And the first one, it still kind of proves your point. So, the first one kind of shows how much each guy gets in each minute. And as you can see in the first minute of this match, The Rock gets absolutely nothing and Hulk Hogan gets in a little bit. And then as we go towards the end of the match, you can see they're each getting loads in. Your point about Hogan getting in more than The Rock, The Rock gets in more than Hogan in 7 of the 16 full minutes, whereas Hogan gets in more than The Rock in 9 of the 16 full minutes. So although it's somewhat even in that Hulk Hogan gets 52% and The Rock gets 48% of the total match offense, it is still somewhat dominated by Hulk Hogan, which is really interesting. In, The Rock's like the star, he's in the prime of career, whereas Hulk Hogan, as we spoke about before, has dodgy knees. How do you think that reflects on the dynamic? Is that an okay dynamic for this match, or is that kind of a kayfabe buster?
No, I think it absolutely works perfectly. If you had The Rock absolutely laying waste to Hulk Hogan, I think the crowd would have gone flat. Hogan was the draw in this match.
Yeah,
this was a wrestler who WWE fans hadn't seen for a decade. This was their star for the 20 years previous to that. Headlined the first 9 WrestleManias. If he'd have come back and then just been laid to waste, I think that crowd would have booed The Rock out of the building. And I know in parts that they did boo him, but that was was following like the trajectory of the story. They got the right, for me, they got the right finish, they got the right story, and they took the whole crowd on a roller coaster journey, and I don't think that would have worked as well if The Rock would have got the majority of the offense. He had to be the one that sold the most, because Hogan obviously wasn't in the right physical state to be able to sell as much as The Rock could. So yeah, I think the statistics play out to a perfect storytelling match.
Yeah, absolutely. And the cumulative flow of offense is interesting too, because it kind of shows that Hulk Hogan almost always has more. He's built up more offense throughout the match. He's kind of punished The Rock more and more and more. And as you mentioned before, it's just there at the end that The Rock finally catches up with him. And he does that by essentially unloading everything that he had on Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan kicks out of a rock bottom around the 14-minute mark. And then The Rock hits Hulk Hogan with 2 rock bottoms in a row, doesn't even bother to go for the cover, hits a people's elbow, and then goes for the cover, which is, in a sense, putting over Hulk Hogan, even though, he's aging, has been away for ages, was the heel coming into this match. That's quite significant as well, as is the way they structured this match, in that Hogan got most of the offense, but you actually got more of the big hits in. So much so, like, a lot of The Rock's punches just hit Hogan, and Hogan's still on his feet. Out of like the big offense, which is moves that kind of that we take away the strikes that don't really do much and short submissions that are like less than 10 seconds. So Hulk Hogan had 17 of those big offense moves in the match, whereas The Rock only had 12. So even there, Hulk Hogan is kind of a big problem for The Rock, and he had to go to his big artillery there to end the match, which is interesting way to portray such an aging superstar. I think the internet would have had some things to say about it.
But I think it plays to both the wrestlers' strengths at that time, though. Hogan's strength was big shots. Like he was known for the big boot. He was known for the leg drop. He wasn't known for technical wrestling. You never saw him doing a sunset flip. You never saw him doing kind of a wrist lock takedown or an ankle pick or anything like that. He was very, very basic in his arsenal. It was big punches, big boots, clotheslines, leg drop, wave to the crowd, pump your muscles. Hogan must pause. That was what Hogan did, and The Rock had to kind of like work his game plan to that, which I think his game plan really kind of melded well with Hogan, because Rock was known for the quick punches, the springy clotheslines, the kip up, stuff like that. So I think their two styles was a real kind of meld that worked really, really well.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool, okay. So now we're going to the really interesting bit. So the next slide, the 4th page, looks, so what we do here is, one of the biggest problems with comparing wrestling matches to each other is they all take different lengths of time. And I'm a big Football Manager geek. Mags, I played it throughout my childhood, teenagehood, still have them now. And they put a lot of statistics into that. And you see it on the internet too with Proper Football. And so the example I always use is, you can see that like Harry Kane is the top goal scorer, 22 goals. He's really good. Mo Salah might be the second top goal scorer. He's scored 20 goals, but he's played significantly less games than Harry Kane, perhaps. So what they quite often do is they give you the goals per game stats, goals per 90 minutes. And you might see that Mohamed Salah has actually scored more goals per 90 minutes than Harry Kane, because he played less, which suggests that if he'd played as many games, he would be the top goal scorer. So I've kind of tried to apply the same logic here and multiplied all their kind of stats up to if the match went for an hour. And it's not the hugest amount of use on its own, but if you go along to a couple of slides on, you will find that I've lined up 4 of them. We've got The Rock versus Hogan, Ultimate Warrior versus Randy Savage, Cody Rhodes versus Dustin Rhodes, and Shingo Takagi versus Kazuchika Okada. So this is kind of a smattering of matches, one from earlier in the company, a good 10 years earlier actually, one from quite recent that I thought was kind of a similar style of match, just kind of more modernized, and another match that is just kind of with it. It was kind of just because I had it, but it's a very modern New Japan match. It was like I was looking for a very different match, and I thought that fit the bill. So, Mags, when we're looking here, I wonder what jumps out to you. The first thing that I would suggest is significant about this match is that both men got in a huge amount of strikes compared to those other 3 matches. I don't know what else jumps out for you.
Yeah, that for me is glaring because watching this match back, and obviously you'd sent me some of these statistics before, and I'm shocked at how many strikes per hour that these guys actually put out. I didn't think it was that strike heavy in terms of some of the matches that we see now, and to see the likes of Shingo and Okada, who are both known for being heavy hitting, strike heavy wrestlers, to see both of them get outstruck per hour by The Rock and by Hogan. That's quite shocking. I can kind of understand it with Cody and Dustin, because that match it seemed it was purposefully slow paced to build the emotion of what the match was. And obviously the Warrior one, he's always going to outstrike everybody because that's all he could do. That's literally all he did. But yeah, the strikes were really, really interesting. The strike downs, I'm actually not surprised that Hogan is far and away the highest, again, aside from Warrior, who only had that one facet to his arsenal. That's interesting, considering especially this is the shortest match of the lot as well. To say he would do 40 strikes downs in that hour, that's a really interesting statistic. And then another one, what really stands out is the small amount of finishes by Hogan. Now, I get the point of his finishes were being kind of protected back from Hogan's era. If he hit a finisher, the match was done. There was no comeback. But it's interesting to see just how many finishers are essentially kicked out nowadays. So yeah, it's really cool to be able to compare and contrast that, all these not only different matches but different eras of wrestling as well, and just how wrestling's changed over the years.
What I thought was the other point that was really interesting about this was how similar they actually were. So there's slight differences between the two of them. Like Hogan gets a bit more strikes, The Rock uses a few more grapples, a few more reversals from The Rock, but everything else is pretty much, it's within the same kind of range. They get similar fouls, similar taunts. In the other matches, there are like huge differences between the wrestlers in like one or two of the categories. Cody, Dustin, huge submission and foul differences between the two of them. Warrior, Savage, Savage wrestles like a quite well-rounded wrestler. Ultimate Warrior doesn't.
Like an animal.
Even Shingo and Okada, they're kind of similar, but Okada uses more than double the submission that Shingo does. Shingo uses dives, Okada doesn't. Shingo uses loads of grapples, Okada less so. I don't know what you make of that. It's interesting that they I don't know, it's maybe almost because they've wrestled half the match each in each of the roles, like the babyface heel dynamic. I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, I mean that's a really good point, and I think the fact that they had to do that double turn. I mean, the Warrior versus Savage, Cody versus Dustin, and Shingo versus Okada. You kind of know their roles in the match going into the match, and it's essentially the same role coming out of the match. Where this one, it's totally flipping the script. So maybe. The game plan wasn't to be as evenly matched. Maybe the game plan could have been to make Hogan look way more kind of dominant than he did, but they went with the crowd, so perhaps that's an influence. Or it could be the fact that these were the two biggest stars in wrestling at this time. Maybe they both wanted enough time to shine, so they both come out of it looking strong going into what was there to come afterwards. You can never tell with wrestling; you can only kind of like surmise. But yeah, it is really interesting. Now you've pointed out how even they are going all the way down the list, and like I said, with Cody and Dustin, there's a huge difference in the submission time. With Warrior and Savage, the strikes per hour is just glaringly obvious, and then the submissions per hour is glaringly obvious. So yeah, it is interesting that this was so evenly matched.
Yeah. In terms of the difference between this match and the Japanese match, what jumps out immediately for you? Is anything surprising there, or does it more or less make sense? That being the one that's perhaps the most difference in genre and, time and where it is in that.
I am shocked that the strike rate of the Japanese match isn't way higher. Japanese wrestling is known for that strong style. It's known for being hard hitting. So I'm actually shocked that The Rock and Hogan not only kept pace with the likes of Shingo and Okada, who you would think were 10 times the wrestlers that The Rock and Hogan are, but they actually outstruck them. That's really, really interesting. And even in terms of reversals, they're pretty similar. The big glaring difference is obviously those huge submission numbers, which it kind of does lead into why Japanese wrestling is the way it is, because it's very hard hitting, submission, technically based wrestling. So that really does lend itself well to Japanese wrestling. But yeah, the big shock for me is how much wrestling from the mid 2000s can keep up with 2021's Japanese style wrestling in terms of strikes.
Yeah, absolutely. And they were throwing them around loads in this match. I think that's maybe not the best comparison. Perhaps it's my fault for putting it there. So Takagi Okada, that's a 36-minute match, whereas this is 16. I wonder if Hulk Hogan would have kept up his strike rate if these guys had gone 36 minutes. What you tend to find is
I don't think I've ever seen a Hogan match go 36 minutes.
I don't think you'd want to. No, I maybe should have picked out a 15-minute Suzuki match or something, because the problem with this comparison is that essentially the longer a match goes, the slower the rates of offense are, because they get tired, they do more selling. Perhaps there were matches during last year's G1, when it was Ibushi Suzuki or Suzuki Takagi, they had over 100 strikes each in that match, and the match was 20 minutes. So when you multiply that up, those are strike rates of 300 strikes per hour. So
record-breaking numbers.
It's crazy. It's kind of unreal. But yeah, interesting. The other thing that jumps out for the Japanese match for me is the reversals. They're both hitting 50, which is a bit above this match, which being shorter, it's perhaps easier for them to reverse, whereas in the Japanese match they still did more, even though it was a longer match. The other thing that really sticks out for this match is the amount of taunts. 91 taunts between them. The only one that was even close to them, although it was far and above, was the Warrior Savage match.
Warrior taunted more than them two put together.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did lots of talking to his hands and shaking ropes. Brilliant. I've got a couple of questions just to finish us off. When I was watching this match, it kind of felt like a bit of a moment in time. It's like you were talking a lot about if you turned the sound off, what this would be like. Mm-hmm. Do you think anything like this is possible today? This kind of dynamic, especially with the crowd.
That's a really difficult question. I think there's the potential for 2 stars to have a match like this. I think the issue nowadays is one, the crowds are so, and Daniel Bryan said it the best, they're so fickle that a lot of times the crowds will go into business for themselves, and they'll kind of like almost attempt to ruin a match. And I think the second issue is that we as wrestling fans we seem to be much more smarter to the business nowadays. So I think if you had a match as basic as The Rock versus Hogan now, it wouldn't capture people's attention. People are always kind of looking for the next big spot or how to get onto Dave Meltzer's 7-star in the Tokyo Dome list.
Yeah.
But saying that, I think we have some wrestlers now who could perhaps emulate this. Maybe, for instance, Jungle Boy, I think he's got a really good wrestling style that works well at drawing a crowd in. But yeah, I think that the times of basic wrestling matches really exciting crowds may be a lost art.
Why do you think that is? Is it because things are too much about moves now, or is that more of like a cultural change?
I think the problem is choice. And as bad as that is, I think there's so much wrestling now that we can get at the touch of our fingertips that a fan or a wrestler are always looking to stand out, and the way that wrestlers stand out now is by doing more and more death-defying, crazy, technically superior wrestling moves. You very rarely now see a match that is the majority of punch, kick, clothesline finisher.
Yeah, you say that on the day that Dante Martin just did that crazy jumping head scissors hurricanrana thing.
Oh my God,
off the top rope to the outside.
And yeah, I've absolutely just buried wrestling like that. Even though it's absolutely amazing, definitely go and check that match out because that kid, he's like Ricochet was 10 years ago. So talented. Yeah, he was brilliant.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. Yeah, I think I've covered everything that I wanted to talk about there, Mags. Is there anything else that jumps to mind about that match that you would like to mention, or you think would be good podcast content, or have we tied up with a neat little bow there?
Yeah, I think it's for me it was cool to go back to the highlights of my wrestling fandom. I think as fans we kind of become very despondent, especially with WWE, with the way that the wrestlers are treated, with the way that the booking's treated, with the way that the fans are treated. I think it's easy to kind of see WWE as the big bad enemy, but it's good that you can go back and see this kind of content and see when wrestling was hot, when fans were wild for the most basic of wrestling matches. And yeah, it's good to look back to know where we've come from and then look at the future and think, do you know what? Maybe it's not as bad as we make out.
Yeah. Do you know, that's actually quite a topical point, with the WWE apparently trying to change NXT so that it's not, apparently the exact quote from the memo was, we're not signing any more midgets or old guys, which is a nice way to talk about humans or your employees. But it sounds like WWE want to bring in more kind of big guys, larger than life characters. And it looks like they're going to, this would be what Vince McMahon wants. He wants to be able to put a charismatic young Rock-like figure against, established other generation kind of muscular megastar like Hulk Hogan. Is that even possible anymore?
with the way that WWE book, and I think John Cena mentioned it in an interview recently, that they can't keep going back to the well with these older wrestlers, because eventually the likes, I mean, using Goldberg now, he can still air quotes go in the ring, but the likes of Cena, the likes of Goldberg, eventually they're not going to be able to go on. And the stars that they've got now are thin on the ground. There's no kind of like stars with the power, the star power of the likes of Cena, of the likes of Goldberg. So the potential is there. I mean, they've got some of the best talented wrestlers in the world under that company, and it annoys when you see the releases, when you see wrestlers not getting pushed, when you see wrestlers not getting airtime or ring time, because that wrestler in 10 years could be headlining a WrestleMania, but is not going to get that opportunity because Vince has this kind of mindset of, this is my new plaything, this is who I want to be the big star. Oh, it's not getting over with the crowd enough. Well, then he goes back to the catering, you never see him again. I think WWE really need to go back to basics and go back to when they had 5, 6, 8 wrestlers who you could legitimately call the world champion. I mean, you go back to the heart of the Attitude Era, even the heart of the Ruthless Aggression Era. They had more than one person who was top of the card. Now it's Roman, it's Drew, it's Bobby Lashley, and then it's nobody. There's not enough huge stars ready to break out, and I think that's the massive issue, and they're going to run into more and more problems because of that.
So a theory I've heard is that they're going to start trying to bring like big muscly guys into NXT rather than like signing the indies, with the hope that if they do that, they will end up with like an OVW class of, you know, Brock Lesnar, John Cena, Randy Orton, and Batista, I believe, were that big 4 class. Do you think it's even possible to like recreate that kind of era where you can sign these big guys that might not necessarily, with all respect to John Cena, who I think is fantastic now, wasn't the best wrestler at the time when you compare him to guys that were around at the time like Eddie Guerrero, Kurt Angle, etc. Is that if they do that tactic in 10 years time, do you think you're going to be able to put not even The Rock versus Hogan at WrestleMania, something like even a watered down version like John Cena versus Batista? Is that possible, or is that just wishing for the past when it's kind of gone?
I mean, it is possible. The talent's out there. I mean, you look at Bronson, Rick Steiner, Parker Boudreaux. These guys look like absolute specimens, but they need time. When John Cena came into the main roster, it was a couple of years before he was even approaching the world title picture. The same with Batista. I mean, he came in as a deacon. Yes, he was then an underling in Evolution.
A bodyguard,
Yeah, exactly. The only one who was kind of like that outlier, and that was because he was legitimately carved out of granite, was Brock Lesnar. He came in and he was a big star straight away. But normally wrestlers need time for the fans to get used to them, for the fans to know their characters, to gain that kind of WWE mentality in the ways of working. And unfortunately, I don't think the WWE gives wrestlers that time anymore. We'll see wrestlers who are not exactly getting over to the way that Vince wants, and then they disappear. Or you'll see a wrestler who gets over legitimately, and because it's not the person that Vince wanted to push, they disappear. It's a real kind of like annoyance, because you get attached to these wrestlers, and the WWE don't want to push them, but they want to push these other wrestlers that you don't know or that you're not attached to. I think it's a pretty short-sighted strategy to hope that you're going to get a crop of wrestlers who can come in and instantly connect with those fans, because if you haven't given those wrestlers the time to build those relationships with the crowd, they're going to flop, and then that wrestler are going to be looked at as a failure, and then they're going to get buried. It's a very vicious circle.
Yeah. Okay. Very last question to finish things off. What do you think will be the next match that will even approach this kind of crowd investment? Do you see one on the near horizon?
Yes. Yes. I do. And this match should have happened at All Out.
Oh, no. Okay.
The next big match that is going to get a reaction like this is going to be Hangman Page winning the AEW title from Kenny Omega. As much as I've kind of ragged on that indie style of wrestling and that kind of a technical style of wrestling, I am so invested in AEW. I think they've been a bright spark in kind of revitalizing wrestling over the last couple of years. The crowd and the fans are ravenous, they're passionate, and everybody loves Hangman. And everybody can't stand, and everybody can't stand Kenny. So that is going to get
in a playing along kind of way, which is cool when the fans are kind of like that invested. Yeah.
I mean, we appreciate Kenny for being the best wrestler in the world, but character-wise, he's a dickhead.
Yes,
and we all know. But yeah, I think that match is going to be outstanding in terms of getting the crowd on board. And it would actually be even better if we got that double turn. If we got Hangman turning on the fans and being a heel and Kenny suddenly becoming the babyface, that'd be absolutely amazing booking.
Wow. I don't think they can do that. I think people would. Can you imagine the meltdowns? People are so invested with Hangman Page.
I mean, there's only one other meltdown that would be bigger, and that's if CM Punk don't turn up in Chicago.
Yeah. Promotional malpractice.
They will burn that stadium down.
Yeah, that might kill AEW on the spot if that happens. Brilliant. Okay. Thank you very much, Mags, for coming along to my new podcast. This should be the second episode going out. If you're listening to this, you might know that, and it will probably be September. Thank you very much for joining me. Would you like to tell the listeners where they can find you? Yeah,
well, first of all, thank you for the invite. I've been in awe of your statistics and the work that you do since pretty much day one. And you've gone on from that to strength. I mean, the work that you guys are doing, the team you've got over at Pro Wrestling Musings, the content you put out it's outstanding. You should be really, really proud of the stuff that you and your team do. And I cannot believe that a mainstream company has not picked you up yet. Fightful, Ringside News, bloody hell, even Wrestling Inc. Sign this guy up. He's an absolute star. He will be a benefit of anyone. I mean, don't go to Ringside News though.
No, I like telling the truth.
But if you want to hear more of me, I don't know why you would, but if you do, you can follow me on Twitter at Podfather Mags. I'm usually on there having a conversation about football or about wrestling. In terms of content,
British food.
Oh, for some reason, I always get dragged into food comments and stories. It's really weird. But in terms of content,
big fan of arrows, I hear.
No, I am not. And let's go for a quick shoot before this podcast. Arrows are anybody who enjoys an arrow. You have been brainwashed by the men at Nestle to buy fresh air and get ripped off from your chocolate. You are buying air bubbles. Just remember that air bubbles, which is free. You can breathe air in for free. But yeah, you can follow my content on the YouTube and Twitch. Just search for Radio Tekkers. I'm also part of the amazing teams at Visionaries Global Media and Chairshot. I have content out pretty much 3-4 times a week. So yeah, check out my Twitter at Podfather Mags for all the links to my content.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. You can find all of our kind of Pro Wrestling Musings stuff at the website prowrestlingmusings.com. Do go along. There's stuff up there just about every day. We're trying to have something going up every day now. And thank you ever so much for listening.